Murder and Such contains true stories about murders, the macabre, true crime, serial killers, and other dark subject matter. This includes adult themes, explicit language, descriptions of gore, violence, and other information provided by news articles, witness testimony, and public record. Murder and Such is not intended for all audiences, and although warnings will be set in place, listener discretion is still advised.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Murder and Such. I am your host, Hunter. Now, I always like to get my housekeeping out of the way, and I do have some new patrons and one new executive producer that I would like to thank. So thank you to Michelle Aucoin for joining the Patreon and helping me out on the back end. I would also like to thank, and I apologize if I butcher your name, I would like to thank Santa Koivu for jumping on the Patreon and helping me out. And for my executive producer, I would like to thank Chantel Wilson of Lady Justice True Crime Podcast for becoming an executive producer. And if you're not listening to Lady Justice True Crime, you should definitely be doing that. And for one thing that I did want to put out is, okay, so with Patreon, it's never a necessity for anybody to join. It helps me out, and I appreciate every single one of my patrons. That's why they get the show early, they get it ad-free, and speaking of early, this episode actually went out live to them the day before episode 75 came out. So I did a little bit of Thanksgiving holiday crunching and knocked out 2 episodes. So if you want to get it early, ad-free, and all that stuff, you can join at just $1 per episode, and I only charge for 2 episodes per month. But getting onto that, I did have somebody that I wanted to apologize to. My friend Stephen Hasey, and I'm going to be doing a film with him very soon. He actually... Steve, I'm sorry, but there's an option if you decide to leave the Patreon, which is perfectly fine. It's not an issue if you decide to leave. I want to apologize to Steve's wife for not knowing that he signed up for the Patreon. And in his exit survey, he said, "Wife yelled at me for doing this without permission." So I am super sorry about that. But don't get in trouble with your wife. I understand if you want to help me out, that's fantastic, but please don't get yourself in trouble with your loved ones. It's honestly not worth it to get in trouble because of me. But anyways, I thank you so much to all of you who have joined the Patreon and the executive producers and everybody else. If you want to join the Patreon page, it is patreon.com/murderandsuch, or you can find the info at murderandsuch.com. And also, if you have the opportunity, if you can't donate to the show, no harm, no foul. If you can find a way to drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, that helps me out more than you can ever imagine. I've gotten a couple 1 stars lately, and I honestly don't know what one of them said because it was gibberish, but if you can drop a 5-star review, it truly does help me more than you can ever imagine. So thank you to all of my patrons. Thank you for everybody who's dropped a 5-star review for me. And I want to thank you for joining me on this episode. So let's jump into it. Family. A word that needs no introduction at all, really. Mothers, fathers, sons and daughters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of that. In a general sense, someone who is related to you by blood. But even friendships over a long period of time, I'd consider them family as well. Hell, I've got friends for damn near 20 years that I would consider close family, even though we aren't bound by blood. Now, it's the holidays. More than likely, you'll be spending time with at least someone that is of your family or someone that you love this holiday season. Granted, we are in the middle of a massive surge of COVID-19 diagnoses, so you should probably do your best to make sure that you don't infect and kill grandma and grandpa. As I always say, wash your filthy goddamn hands and wear a mask. Hopefully by this time next year, the transmission and infection rate should be going down. But that really means that we should all do our part to be safe. As you can tell by now, COVID-19 is not a liberal hoax. Anyways, around this time last year, I did a Christmas episode that surrounded the case of Ronald Gene Simmons, where he killed his entire family around Christmas, otherwise referred to as familicide or complete family annihilation. There were signs of Ronald having an incestuous relationship with some of his family members, which sexual attraction to your own flesh and blood is something that I will never understand. Really. Usually, I'm not one to kink shame somebody, but sometimes you've just gotta throw your hands up and say, fuck it, we're kink shaming, because there is something just gravely wrong with somebody who has a sexual relationship against their own family member's will. You are not a good person. But according to RAINN, the National Sexual Violence Help website, it stated that in 2016 alone, 1 in 9 girls and 1 in 53 boys under the age of 18 have been sexually assaulted, with that number being a total amount of 57,329 children in that year alone. Now, 93% of those victims knew their attacker, and 34% of them were actually close family members. So just think to yourself, what's 34% of 57,329? That number is a staggering 19,491 children who have been sexually assaulted by someone of their own flesh and blood. It's far too common for what I would consider a modern society to have. I wouldn't even say that there's a fine line when it comes to your sexual partners. People should never want to have sex with their children or grandkids. There's absolutely no excuse for it. I'd personally love to tear your fingernails out with vice grips and make sure that every step you take for the rest of your life involves a Lego being under your foot. Leave your kids alone. Now, I will note that in the case of Ronald Gene Simmons, it was not consensual. Ronald was a maniac, a monster, a fucking gross subhuman piece of shit where he made victims out of his own children. But the cases that I'm going to bring to you for this episode are those of a father and daughter who knew that they were related by blood, but threw all of that caution to the wind and had committed crimes while knowing the biological ties. Some may think, the world will never agree with our relationship, which, no, they won't. But the two cases that I'm going to bring to you not only go from incestuous and disgusting to straight up murderous. But as always, my name is Hunter, and you're listening to Murder and Such, and this is episode 76, All in the Family. And I don't normally dedicate episodes to anyone, but a longtime listener of the show lost her best friend recently. So I'm going to dedicate this episode to the best boy that ever existed. This one goes out to Charlie. Rest in peace, handsome. But before we get into it, I know you guys hate ads, but my network says I have to put them in. So, hey, quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Hit that skip button. Thanks. Sorry about that, but let's get on with the show. The first case I'm going to bring you involves 3 people: Amanda McClure, Anna Chaudhry, and Larry McClure. Now, Larry Paul McClure had a very disgusting and checkered past. He was born on March 3rd of 1964. When he was 23 years old, he had his first daughter, Anna Marie Chaudhry, who was born on August 21st of 1987. But when he was 24 years old, on July 10th of 1988, he brought his other daughter, Amanda Michelle McClure, into the world. She was a shorter woman at the height of 5 foot 1 inches tall. Now, as far as his criminal record, it was very extensive. From what I found from the Kentucky Sex Offender Registry is that in the state of West Virginia, he was convicted of sexual assault with a 6-year-old child and sentenced to 17 years behind bars. He was classified as a Tier 3 sex offender and was going to be put on supervised release for the rest of his life. Trust me, I don't understand why someone would do that either, but those are the facts as they are right now. But when it came to his daughters, he wasn't the best father that one could ever imagine. Obviously, he faced a litany of drug charges, petty larceny, theft, you name it, he did it. Considering he wasn't your typical law-abiding citizen, he had relinquished his rights as their biological father, and Amanda was taken care of by people by the name of Alan and Gwen Holm, while Larry spent time in and out of jail for various offenses. With Larry out of the picture, it seemed like everything was going just fine as time went on, even decades later when Larry finally decides to reconnect with both Anna and Amanda. It was at some point in Larry's life before meeting the two girls again that he committed the sexual assault of a 6-year-old and spends the 17 years behind bars, and he gets out of jail sometime in 2018. Now keep in mind, when you're a Tier 3 sex offender, if you move or relocate, you have to check in with a probation or parole officer. Moving without the consent of a said official will be a violation of your parole, and you could be facing some serious charges including fines, probation extensions, or even being sent back to the clink because you're an inept sack of shit. I couldn't find much as far as his victim is concerned, or whether or not they were related to him in any way, shape, or form, but still, that's disgusting. Regardless, keep his inability to check in with authorities in the back of your mind. Now that will bring us to late 2018, early 2019. Larry had reconnected with his two daughters. Amanda had been living in the town of Chisago City, Minnesota, and had gotten a boyfriend by the name of John McGuire until they had later decided to relocate to the desolate hellscape of Indiana. The relationship that John and Amanda had was one that also had a chemical bond. Amanda had gotten herself into trouble on drug offenses copious amounts of time in her 32 years. I won't victim blame either John or Amanda, but drugs will always complicate things. It was said that John and Amanda had become dope sick after being withdrawn from substances for a few weeks. They were both practically strung out and looking for a safe place to be. In the meantime, Anna was living in North Carolina and had reconnected with her father, who also found Amanda and John in Indiana. So Anna and Larry had made the couple 100 miles trek to go pick them up. From there, all four of them headed back to the town of Sky Gusty, West Virginia. Now, West Virginia itself has somewhat of a bad drug problem. According to drugabuse.gov, 2018's results as far as opioid-related deaths in West Virginia are the same tier as that of Ohio, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maryland at over 27.8 deaths per 100,000 people. West Virginia's number is actually 42.4, and there's roughly 70 prescriptions that were doled out per 100,000 people. This is the only reported deaths that are claimed addictions, where the number could actually be a lot higher. Needless to say, not the best place to be in the country for somebody who's currently going through withdrawals. So they cross state lines multiple times until they get back to McDowell County and wind up at Larry McClure's trailer in Sky Gusty, West Virginia. From there, they spend over a week together, drinking, using drugs including methamphetamine, and starting to rekindle their relationship with one another. I do talk a lot about drug usage on the show and how it could cloud your judgment. It will make you do such things that you wouldn't normally do. Steal from people that you love to get what you need, abuse and hurt the ones you love as well. But in the midst of their drug bender, that's when Amanda and Larry did something, well, more than rekindle their relationship. Buckle up, this is gonna get pretty fucking gross. Now, we've been in relationships. Some are fantastic, in which two people love each other enough to want to get married. Some are extremely lackluster, and people do fall in and out of love. Some also include abuse, whether it's domestic violence, drug abuse, or verbal abuse, psychological abuse even. But in most cases, when two people aren't compatible, they can either file for a divorce, or if it's just a boyfriend-girlfriend type thing, people will break up. It seems pretty rudimentary, right? Now, the one idea that starts floating around is how much Larry loves his daughter, Amanda. Not your typical love between a parent and child, but one that's more incestuous, where you really start loving your kid to a disgusting level. Larry was also very protective of his daughter and would get incredibly jealous with John. When John wasn't around, Larry and Amanda would have sex and would often hide their disgusting activities within the four walls of the trailer. Evidence of their sexual activities would later bring criminal complaints to the both of them while investigators searched the trailer for forensic evidence. Their love grew and grew over the 10-day period, but one thing stood in the way. It wasn't the laws or repercussions for the sordid love affair. It was an innocent man by the name of John Thomas McGuire. Sure, it would be easy just to break up with John and send him packing back to Indiana or even his former home in Minnesota, but again, the drugs added to this mix wouldn't make it your typical breakup. So Amanda and Larry kept this secret from John and carried on with this horrible plot, and John was never the wiser. Now that brings us to Thursday, February 14th of 2019, and John has himself a fantastic idea. He managed to scrounge up some money, and he thought that it would be a romantic gesture to head out of the trailer and pick up a bottle of wine. It was Valentine's Day after all, so why not christen the day? While John was out and about, Larry and Amanda had decided that this breakup would be one that the world would never forget. When John came back, the sisters and father welcomed him inside with no issues at all. He placed the bottle of wine on the coffee table and sat down in a chair. That's when Anna picked up the bottle and had struck John over the head, knocking him out cold. This would be one of the first of many days of pain and suffering for this innocent man. The three members had bound and gagged him, then took turns not only punching him, kicking him, and making mincemeat of this innocent man, but Anna had also decided that she was going to keep him alive by injecting him with liquid methamphetamine. When it seemed like he would succumb to his injuries, she would give him a shot of meth to bring him back to the land of the living. This torture lasted from Thursday until early Sunday morning. It was later stated that what he endured, according to Larry, was 2 to 3 days of hell. He was forced to feel the family, something straight out of House of a Thousand Corpses, take turns degrading him, feel the pain inflicted onto him for no reason at all, and watched a 55-year-old father and convicted sex offender have sex with his own 30-something-year-old daughter. It was in a secluded area where the trailer was located. Nobody would hear his cries of pain, his demented attackers laugh at his suffering, until they finally decide on Saturday that this vicious game was over. That's when Amanda takes a black trash bag and wraps it around John's face, nose, and mouth. John thrashes around, trying to take any sort of breath that he can, so then Larry holds him down while Anna wraps her hands around his throat and finally chokes John to death. John Thomas McGuire left behind children, parents, a family, and a legacy that was stripped away from him for no reason. Something that could have just been simple as a breakup turned into a premeditated murder at the hands of this disgusting and incestuous family. But on Sunday morning, they dug a shallow grave only about 2 feet deep, outside of the trailer, and tossed his body in as if he was just a piece of trash. But they weren't done with his body quite yet. About 6 days after his murder, they decide to go back outside and dig John back up. They then proceeded to dismember his corpse and repeatedly stab it with stakes before finally leaving his remains to rest in yet another shallow grave near a field by the house. The secret was to be kept between the three of them. Meanwhile, they're still spending time doing drugs, having sex, and, it's just fucking gross. The murder is absolutely heinous, without a shadow of a doubt, but this bender that they were on and the incest that's taking place is just beyond the pale. But that brings us to 3.5 weeks later, on March 11th, of 2019, when Amanda and Larry, keep in mind, father and daughter, finally decide to seal the deal and travel across the state to Tazewell County, Virginia, and finally become husband and wife. I'm honestly about to puke in my own mouth. For the meantime, they had taken John's checkbook and start passing along checks, which actually helped the investigators later determine where John McGuire's last whereabouts were. But as the checks start bouncing, their bender was surely coming to an end. Was this the moment of clarity for all of them? Was the end of this drug-fueled murder, incest, marriage, and pure fucking lunacy finally over? I can't say for sure. But that's when Larry decides to disregard his parole requirements and hightail it out of the state and lands himself in Pendleton, Kentucky. Now this soon bites him in the ass as he's found by the authorities since he went missing from Skygusty. For some reason, his daughter-wife wasn't with him as Amanda and Anna had relocated back to Boone, North Carolina. For the trailer, it went practically undisturbed for nearly 7 months. Now that brings us to September of 2019. While being on the run in Kentucky, Larry is picked up by the authorities and found to have a warrant for his arrest, for the reason being because he failed to register as a sex offender. He was then extradited back to McDowell County, West Virginia. While he was booked, and I can't say for sure why he would want to come clean, maybe because the fact that he was just out of jail not too long ago for sex crimes and he knew that he would be going back to jail, or maybe this shell of a man, maybe, and I really mean maybe, has some sort of conscience to him, but Larry starts talking. The first thing that he had told the investigators was that he was not a single man, but had recently married his own daughter about 6 months ago in Virginia. I don't think that getting married while on parole is a violation of your parole requirements, but I'll tell you one thing, it's definitely against the law to marry your own kid. For how much he would be sentenced for that? I don't know. But then he dropped the bombshell and admitted that he knew the whereabouts of a missing man by the name of John Thomas McGuire. When they asked him what he knew about his disappearance, he had told them that he was in a shallow grave by his trailer in Sky Gusty. The authorities, obviously stunned by his admission, had decided to get a forensic investigation team and went out and discovered the heavily decomposed remains of John on September 24th of 2019. Larry continues to confess to the gravity of his crimes and does so by admitting to everything in written letter form so nothing would be taken out of context. He admits to them that he was not alone in his murder, but both of his daughters played a hand in this brutal execution. He admits that his 31 and 32-year-old daughters were both involved with not only the drug usage, but also with John McGuire's grisly fate. They are soon picked up by authorities and all brought in on charges stemming from first and second-degree murder to desecration of a corpse. Unfortunately, the news was finally relayed to John McGuire's mother, Karen, who hadn't heard from her son in over half a year. Devastated by the news, she didn't know what to think. Her son had just been found, and as you can imagine, the additional reasons of how he was murdered, where he was found, and most of all the reason of why he was murdered had put her into a state of shock and horror. Who could have done this to her 38-year-old son, and why was he murdered? Because a father-husband and a daughter-wife wanted to be married? The decision that they had was not only selfish, but it would be one that was written in some sort of a disgusting and twisted fantasy. But that sick and twisted fantasy had become all too real to Karen. Now, as far as the case goes, there wasn't really any contest to anything. Both sisters were behind bars, and Larry was admitting to every single aspect of this sordid love affair and murder. Larry had even written on a piece of paper that he didn't want a trial after he was extradited to West Virginia. He stated, quote, "I just want it over. No trial, no taxpayers' money spent for a trial. It is hard for the state of West Virginia to fight against itself because I plead guilty/no contest. Thank you for your time on this matter. Signed, Larry Paul McClure, Sr." All three of them are held behind bars, awaiting either trial or sentencing. That brings us to July 8th of 2020. Larry McClure had reached a plea deal in the murder of John McGuire. His guilty plea will result in life in prison, but whether or not it would be without mercy is up to the judge on August 14th of 2020. For Amanda, since her father-husband had disclosed every aspect of the murder to the authorities, she was facing a second-degree murder charge since she had been the one who wrapped the black trash bag around John McGuire's face. Her plea hearing was on July 27th of 2020, with her sentencing to be held on October 1st of 2020. Her sentencing would be between 10 and 40 years behind bars. But when it came to it, for Larry's sentencing, he was handed down a life sentence with no possibility of parole on August 14th. And for Amanda, she was given 40 years behind bars on October 1st. She will be 73 years old when she is eligible to be released from prison. But for Anna, she's still facing a trial for her first-degree murder charge and conspiracy charge. As of right now, there is no official outcome of how long she will be sent to spend time behind bars, But with Larry's admissions to her being the one hitting John over the head with the wine bottle, injecting him with liquid methamphetamine, and being the one who strangled him to death, you would think that there's a very small possibility that this woman will ever see the outside of a prison wall ever again. But now for the families and friends of John Thomas Maguire, they will never truly understand why their father and son and friend was murdered. And they may never find true closure to one of the most twisted love stories in American history. It just makes you cringe thinking about that. But I'm going to take a small break, pay some bills, and I'll be right back with the second case of this episode. So hang tight, and also feel free to hit that skip button. It comes in handy. And welcome back. And also, thank you for the feedback about me putting disclaimers in when there's upcoming ads. I know I kind of sprinkled them in all willy-nilly. Jesus Christ, did I just say fucking willy-nilly? Anyways, but I know that they can be somewhat intrusive, but I only have control over where they go, but not how many ads are actually played. I've got to keep the studio lights on for some reason. Anyways, for this episode, since the first one was quite extensive, I will only have 2 cases for this episode. But I don't want to say I'm saving the best for last because that's pretty distasteful. But for this one, it's just really, really bad. This one involves a man, a monster, a murderous, incestuous fucking sack of smashed assholes by the name of Stephen Platel. Stephen Walter Platel was born on April 6th of 1975 in Levittown, New York. I can't find much about his early childhood or his upbringing, aside from the fact that he was not a, let's say, emotionally stable young man. Stephen had himself most likely one of the shortest fuses that one could imagine, which led to an anger issue that would lead to his own form of pure hell for anyone who was on the receiving end of it. In today's day and age, you can meet practically anyone on the internet through Tinder, Grindr, Bumble, gluten-free singles, farmers only, or even diaper mates. Yes, there's a lot of websites out there for dating now. A couple of my other found favorites are Mullet Passions, Ugly Schmucks, Clown Dating, Date a Golfer, and of course, Furry Mate. But could you imagine back in 1995 that there was even, hell, I didn't even use the internet that far back, but for 20-year-old Stephen, he found the opportunity to meet and groom a 15-year-old woman by the name of Alyssa Garcia. Not 2 years later, after Alyssa had turned 17, she had given birth to her and Stephen's daughter Denise in January of 1998. A beautiful child with dark hair and brown eyes, a radiant smile, brought into this world to a mother who wanted to give her the world, but meanwhile, a father who lacked any regard for responsibility and completely lacked remorse. Signs started showing with Stephen's anger towards becoming a brand new father. A newborn child will cry. That's not only a given, it's to be expected. Alyssa would do what she could to coddle her daughter, keep her happy, but sometimes it's inevitable when a child is going to cry. That would be something that Stephen would not take lightly to. At first, he would just become frustrated with the child, but then his anger started filling into the point where he would violently pinch Denise until her body was black and blue from the bruising. And in an exclusive interview with the Daily Mail with Alyssa, she also stated that when Denise would cry, he would sometimes put Denise in a large cooler and shut the lid. Whether she was alive in the cooler or dead, Stephen didn't care. He lacked all forms of responsibility and compassion for his infant daughter. But that's when Alyssa had made the decision to formally put Denise up for adoption. They were both incredibly young at the time, and Alyssa felt that the life that she had to provide for Denise was inadequate, and honestly, she knew it was dangerous for her there. That's when the two met people by the names of Anthony and Kelly Fusco. Two people who were looking to bring a bundle of joy into their home in New York. So when everything was finalized, Denise had found herself a brand new home away from her monstrous father, and was even given a new name. From that point forward, Denise Pladel would soon become Katie Fusco. Alyssa's decision of selflessness and love for her daughter had finally gotten her a better home and a better life that she knew that she couldn't provide for on her own. For her own relationship with Stephen, I would have hoped that she found a way to get away from him, his anger, and his torture of her, but eventually Alyssa had married Stephen in 2006. Now, I'm no expert in relationships, but Alyssa and Stephen were both young. Stephen had severe disturbances in his life, so much that he always felt the need to have control over Alyssa. Even at 17, Alyssa and her family members had become estranged. Stephen would hold leverage over her in any way possible. To me personally, it sounds like a case of battered woman syndrome or intimate partner violence, a subcategory of post-traumatic stress disorder. If she witnessed Stephen violently pinching her daughter and damn near suffocating her in a cooler, you could only imagine what Stephen would then do to her. According to PsychiatricTimes.com regarding battered woman syndrome, or BWS, it says, quote, "It is understood that domestic violence is part of gender violence, and that many more women than men are victims of physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Even when women strike back or engage in mutual violence, it is usually the woman who is most likely to be hurt, both physically and emotionally. Women who strike back in self-defense are often arrested alongside their batterer." But as I do with many of my episodes, I will remind you that there is help out there if you need it. Thehotline.org is a fantastic outlet for those who need it, and it's the main hotline for victims of domestic violence, with resources for both male and female support for those who are in abusive relationships and need some sort of a way out. Now, if you ever need to, the website is www.thehotline.org, in which they do have a live chat option where you can speak to a professional. Or, if you need to call them, you can reach them at 1-800-799-7233 or 1-800-799-SAFE. If you feel unsafe and you need help now, you can call or sometimes even text 911 in your area to get the help that you need immediately. Nobody should be afraid in their own home with their partner. And there is always someone there who's willing to listen to you, find the help that you need, and try their best to make sure that your life is a safe one. Even if you know someone who needs it, remember, the website is thehotline.org and 1-800-799-SAFE or 7233. Now back to the story. As time goes on, both Alyssa and Stephen grow older and maybe decide that they're old enough to try having kids again. In 2007, Alyssa and Stephen have another daughter brought into this world. Had Stephen changed enough to finally become a father and not subject his new daughter to the same kind of abuse that he did to Katie? Maybe, maybe not. But that didn't stop him. Alyssa still saw issues with Stephen's behavior, though. Stephen became more secluded as time went on. He spent copious amounts of time on the internet, much to his own detriment. He always had issues finding work, but when he did, it was even harder for him to retain that job. Sure, they had verbal fights, but again, Alyssa still hadn't known much in her adult life away from Stephen. She still felt trapped in this prison that he held her within. She was 26, he was 31, and maybe this could finally work out between the two of them. So 5 years later, they give birth to a second daughter in 2012. I will be leaving the children's names out of this episode for obvious reasons, because there are many, many victims in this case, and due to how recent it is, I don't believe the wounds have or ever will heal from this. Now for Katie, she was living a normal teenage life. She signed herself up for Instagram in 2012 and started posting pictures of her adopted father, her cats, including one named Yogurt, even posted a photo resembling something straight out of a South Park episode where she took a screenshot of a poke that her grandmother had sent her on Facebook and said, quote, "When your grandma gets a Facebook and hashtag poked, hashtag 5th time." Now other posts included food, family, friends, painting, pets, and even had one that she posted when she had 69 followers, which, nice. But from what it seemed, she was a normal teenager. She was attending high school, heading to Virginia Beach on spring break, headed to Buffalo, New York, but where she was adventuring out, she always felt like something was missing. That's when she sat down with Anthony and Kelly and had told them that she wanted to find her biological parents. They gave her all the information that she needed, and through the same internet in which Alyssa and Steven had met, she connected to them to finally get the answers that she was looking for. She's now 18 years old, she's just graduated from Dover High School, and free to adventure out where she wants. In 2016, she finds Alyssa and Steven, 37 and 42 respectively, on social media and decides to contact them. Katie writes an email to Alyssa and says, quote, "Don't know if you're okay with this, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Hi." Alyssa responds, they're currently living in Virginia in the town of Henrico near Richmond. She finds out that she has 2 younger sisters. She's enthralled with this information as much as anyone would be to find out that you've got an extensive family that you didn't know had existed. With Katie's prowess on Instagram, she definitely had the chops to be an artist and intends to start a career in digital advertising while attending SUNY Purchase in Harrison, New York. She's a high school graduate and had the world at her fingertips, but she decides that she's not going to head to college quite yet. She had fallen in love with this newfound family of hers and decided to actually pack up her belongings and headed down to Richmond to live with her younger sisters, her mother, and her father. Now, this is 18 years past the point of when Alyssa knew that Denise, now Katie, would be in danger for living with them. Has Steven changed at all? Well, to be honest, no. In an interview with the Daily Mail, she said that at one point she witnessed Steven nearly beat one cat to death, then beat another one to death completely just for wandering into his garage. He wrapped it up in a trash bag and threw it in the garbage can, all because he didn't like cats. He was still mentally, emotionally, verbally, and physically abusive. Even 20 years after being with him, this man had never gotten the help that he needed and showed little to no signs of wanting to change who or what he was. Almost one of those cases of someone who was just plain evil since birth. He had managed to amass 5 firearms, but was able to do so because he had never faced any felonious charges. He secluded himself on the internet more and more over time. He had no real friends, nothing noteworthy in his 40-something years to really go off of, except for his lifelong streak of anger and madness, punching walls, throwing furniture, and the emotional scars along the way. Steven and Alyssa were now sleeping in separate bedrooms in the house, and chances of their relationship getting back on the right track seemed to be diminishing by the day. But in August of 2016, something changed with Steven. He seemed a little bit happier. He seemed a little more full of life and less angry for some reason. Did he have a change of heart, or was he just happy to have his 18-year-old daughter living back with him? It was reported in September of 2016, Stephen decides not to sleep in just another room any longer and starts sleeping on the floor of his 18-year-old daughter's room. And I'm not gonna lie, that's fucking creepy. Not much longer, Katie, under the pressure of her biological father, starts a sexual relationship with him, but not one that would go unnoticed. Alyssa had noticed that Katie and Stephen were spending an awful lot of time together, and she started having her suspicions, but nothing was really confirmed to her. Regardless, she finally gets the courage to move out in November of 2016. Then she files for a divorce from Stephen. Now this is something that Alyssa had feared would lead to a grim outcome, because she had stated in the Daily Mail article that, quote, "He threatened that if I was gone, he would blow his brains out with a gun, figure out a way to record it, and make sure that the video got to me," end quote. But the divorce was granted and finalized in March of 2017. Since Stephen didn't have a job at the time, Alyssa was granted primary custody of her younger two daughters. But Katie had decided to stay with Stephen, even though he had little to nothing to provide to his now 19-year-old daughter. He was granted chances to see his other two daughters, but his middle daughter, now 11 years old, had grown up knowing Stephen's rage and anger, something that always struck fear into her heart. See, the thing is when it comes to an abusive home, it's not that somebody has to be physically violent with you to make you know that they're not a good person. Even their daughters at such a young age knew what kind of violence and abuse that Stephen was putting them through. Alyssa had revealed in the Daily Mail article that he was never sexually abusive towards the girls, but on one incident, their youngest daughter had wet herself. Alyssa said, quote, "He made her wait in the bathtub in her urine-covered clothes for hours until I came home to clean her up. She was shaking and said, 'Can I please come out, Mommy?' He didn't care that she was up there crying by herself, 3 years old, trembling in a bathtub, covered in urine." But that is not all that Stephen would do. Now, this comment comes directly from Alyssa's mouth, and it does have an ableist slur. You have been warned. She said, quote, "My daughter is on the autism spectrum, and he would often call her retard to her face. I did fight with him, I did protect my kids, I did keep them away from him at times," end quote. To think that these girls were growing up without resentment towards their father would be a gross understatement. On May 23rd of 2017, Stephen calls up Alyssa to tell her that on one of the visits to his house, their 11-year-old daughter had been acting up. To back up his claims, he handed Alyssa over the evidence. The evidence was her 11-year-old daughter's diary. The following excerpts are directly from this diary. Quote,
"Katie is my big sis. I really fucking loved her. I also love how she was skinny in areas and had smaller breasts, but now she is pregnant and gaining weight. My dad calls her baby, also his baby. Did he make her pregnant? My dad even says that she's my stepmom. WTF? He doesn't even want me to call her my sister anymore. Katie is my sister. She's probably his wife now, but in nature, she's only my sister. Does she see me as a daughter or a sister? Katie now sometimes tells me to get the fuck up."
The diary goes on to read, quote,
"Katie is pregnant. Dad says they feel like couples. Did they get a little too drunk that night? My dad is a slut. He's Satan. He's fucking Satan. He'll go to hell, but he won't be the one getting tortured. He'll be the one torturing people. Wait 1 second. If he's Satan and Katie is human, then the baby will be half demon."
end quote. Granted, the whole Satan half-demon baby is somewhat of a child with an imagination. Even this admission of Katie being pregnant took Alyssa by pure shock and horror. She immediately called Stephen to confront him about the evidence that she found. Part of her thought he wanted her to know exactly what was happening, as when she arrived, he told her exactly what she already knew. Katie, now 19 years old, was pregnant with his child, and yes, grandchild. He confirmed their incestuous relationship, and she even asked him about what her adopted mother and father thought about it. He told her that they were incredibly unhappy at first, but they had later come to accept it. He also admitted to Alyssa that he planned on marrying her eventually. Alyssa filed a petition barring Stephen from having any sort of contact with her or her younger two girls. This eventually started an investigation, in which they interviewed Stephen's youngest two daughters, but no arrests were made in the case. You can't imagine what it's like to be Alyssa in this entire debacle. But then the news comes as posted to Katie's Instagram. On July 20th, 2017, Katie posts a picture of her and Stephen kissing with the caption, "Nothing fancy, just love." They had not disclosed to the powers that be that they were about to wed a husband and wife that was actually a father and daughter, in which, you guessed it, is illegal. Katie is also visibly pregnant in the posting itself. Guests in attendance of the wedding, which took place in Maryland, were Kelly and Anthony Fusco and Stephen's old 72-year-old mother, Grace. All three of them knew that they were fully bound by blood, but none of them could do anything about it. These two were married, and although they couldn't do anything to change the outcome, they still tried their best to support this disgusting affair. Now that brings us to September 1st of 2017. Katie gives birth to her son and also brother. And Stephen witnesses the birth of his son and also grandson. The boy is named Bennett. Pictures are posted to Katie's Instagram, as she was not one to shy away from the public view. Those pictures are now taken down. This takes everybody by surprise, as her friends back home didn't know that she was pregnant, but the ones closest to Stephen and Katie knew the awful truth about how this boy had been brought into this world. Alyssa contacts the authorities again and tells them of the news. It wouldn't be until 2 months later in November that a warrant is issued out of Henrico County, Virginia for both of their arrests. Since Stephen and Katie wanted to keep things pretty hush-hush, they hadn't disclosed to practically anyone that they had relocated to Knightdale, North Carolina, where they were living their lives as husband and wife. They would eventually be found and arrested on January 27th of 2018 and held at the Wake County Detention Center in North Carolina, awaiting extradition to Virginia. Both were issued bond amounts at $1 million each. Both of their charges included incest with an adult, adultery, and contributing to delinquency. These were federal charges that could land them both behind bars for up to 10 years. As for Bennett, he was sent to live with Stephen's mother, Grace, for the time being. Now everything is starting to fall apart for the both of them. They're both facing jail time, even though Stephen posts bond and is let out of jail. Katie's adopted father, Anthony, later comes to her rescue and helps get her out of jail as well. On March 16th of 2018, at Stephen's bond hearing, the judge hands down Stephen a no-contact order with Katie, Katie's adoptive family, but not only with them, but also with Alyssa and his other two daughters. He doesn't, however, have a protective order against him with Bennett. The authorities also have him relinquish his firearms. But do you remember how I said that he owned 5 of them? he only gave over 4. Now for Katie, she gets out of jail and returns back to her adoptive mother and father's house in New York. Of course, being 20 years old and facing a possible sentence of 10 years behind bars might be a moment of clarity for someone. She was absolutely young and made a disgusting decision not only to rekindle love with her father, but also decide to put a ring on it. I know how I typically say that the human brain isn't fully developed until you're the age of 25, but we do know how manipulative, abusive, and how horrible a person has to be to convince their own flesh and blood that she would not only be Steven's wife, but also the mother of his son to grandson. So Steven returns back to his home in North Carolina, awaiting trial, then sentencing. And this is a lot of time for him to sit and think about what he had done. All the time in the world, considering this 43-year-old piece of shit hadn't held down a real job in nearly 8 years. But it was also time for Katie to come with terms with what she was going through. A young woman manipulated by her own biological father, but there would still be time for her to turn her life around. Maybe being back in the love and care of the people who had provided for her for the past 18 years could flip the switch inside of her head, and she could once again regain a loving and caring household with people who actually cared about her instead of one that just wanted to take advantage of her. Sure, she was facing an uphill battle, but the first part of recovering from all of this was to call out her abuser and finally put an end to this relationship. She mustered the courage and finally put that stake through Steven's heart that her own biological mother had been afraid to do for over 20 years before. On April 11th of 2018, Katie decides to violate the no-contact order that she had placed against her and Steven, and calls him on his phone to tell him it's over. To Katie, she was finally free. But from that moment forward, nobody could have imagined what Steven would do.
3911, address of the emergency.
Yes. My son just called me, and he told me oh my God.
The voice that you're hearing is that of a 72-year-old woman by the name of Grace Pladel, Steven's mother. This phone call was placed on April 12th of 2018 at 8:52 a.m. after receiving a phone call from Steven. I will be playing the 911 call in its entirety. Here is the rest of it.
North Carolina. He killed his baby, and he's in the house.
Okay, you said that he told you he killed his baby. Okay, ma'am, listen to me. What's your name? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
He's not home. His wife broke up with him over the phone yesterday, and he told me, she's in New York, and he told me he was on his way. He called me last night and said he's on his way. He's going to bring the baby to her, and then he was coming back. And he just
Okay.
He said he doesn't have, he killed his wife, he killed her father, and I can't even believe this is happening.
Okay. And did this happen in Nightdale?
No, his wife and father are in New York.
Okay,
and,
so the incident
but
actually...
he left the baby dead when he left.
Okay, where did he leave the baby?
Okay, he said it was in the...
What's your son's name? What's his last name?
Same as mine.
When did this happen?
He said He left last night. He called me, I forget, maybe about 7 last night, and said he was on his way to New York. He was going to bring to his wife and give it to her, and then he'd be back. And he called me this morning. I just got off the phone just a couple of minutes ago, and he told me to call the police, that I shouldn't go over there.
Okay, so the son is, so your son is not there?
No, the house is empty. He said he put a key under the front mat. To take a key to get into the house under the front mat.
Did he say how he did it? Or what
no,
he did?
And I didn't ask him. I didn't want to know. Oh my God. He's such a wonderful little boy.
Okay, hold on just a second, okay? Okay.
Hello?
Okay, I'm still here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get you over to Raleigh Communications, okay? Let me talk first when I call, okay, so I can kind of give them an idea of what was going on, and then I'm going to let you speak with a telecommunicator, okay? All right, hold on for me, okay? Are you still with me?
I'm here.
Hey, this is over in Cary. I have a lady wanting to report a possible homicide.
All right.
And she states that she got a call from her son. Was it this morning?
Yes.
This morning, stating that his wife had split up with him, and she was in New York, and that he killed left him upstairs at the residence.
Just a moment, okay?
So I'm still here, okay?
Okay.
Do you know if he's still at home?
No, he's not.
He's not? Okay.
Okay, Raleigh, I'm going to disconnect.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Uh-huh.
There were some parts of that audio that were beeped out that included names and addresses. Here is what happened. After Stephen got off the phone with Katie, he picked up his son from his mother's house. As you heard in the statements from Grace, he had told her that he was going to take Bennett back up to New York to Katie, but that would never happen. When he picked up Bennett, he drove the child back to his house in Nightdale and suffocated the 7-month-old and left his body in a closet. From there, Stephen picked up his AR-15 rifle, left a key to his house under the floor mat in front of his house, and drove through the night, and posted at the Wingdale Beer and Liquor Store off of Highway 22 in Wingdale, New York. Why would he post out there? Because he knew that every Tuesday and Thursday, Anthony Fusco and Katie would be heading to Anthony's mother's house in Waterbury, Connecticut. Surveillance footage shows a light blue minivan posted outside of the liquor store before departing after a dark-colored Toyota pickup with a maroon topper had driven past. He follows the truck along Route 55 until it comes to the intersection of Highway 7, crossing into the Connecticut area. From there, he pulls his van alongside the front of the Toyota pickup, grabs his AR-15, and proceeds to riddle the pickup, leaving both Anthony and his own daughter, 20-year-old Katie, dead at the scene. As Alyssa stated in her interview with the Daily Mail, quote, ultimately, Steve was just finishing off what he started 20 years earlier, end quote. From there, Stephen went back across the state lines to Dover, New York, the same town in which his daughter had graduated from high school. He called his mother on the way, leading her to make the phone call to police. He told her, "By the time that you call them, I'll already be dead." He parked his van, put the barrel of his rifle to his head, and pulled the trigger, bringing his murderous rampage across 3 separate states to an end. Stephen Platel took the life of an innocent 7-month-old boy who never had the chance to grow up and experience a wholesome life that would be provided to him. He murdered a 56-year-old man who had nothing but love and adoration for his wife and daughter of 18 years, a man who was a handyman and friendly with all of his neighbors. He took the life of his own daughter, his own flesh and blood that he had manipulated and convinced that he loved more than life itself. And when she put the brakes on this disgusting love affair and denied him any more advances, he decided that if he couldn't have her, nobody would have her. Katie, Anthony, and Bennett were all laid to rest on April 21st of 2018 at the St. Charles Borromeo Church in Dover Plains, New York. Alyssa, shocked and stunned, and horrified for what this man who once groomed her on the internet when she was only 15 years old had finally turned out to be. A murderous fucking coward who took what he wanted, threw tantrums when he didn't get what he wanted, and he was finally dead, but he left victims, images, and fear in his wake. Alyssa believes that a grave mistake was made when they let him have full visitations with Bennett. Although nobody could have stopped him, that maybe the authorities could have prevented at least one other death during this multi-state rampage. Regarding the authorities, Alyssa had stated, quote, "I want them to overthink. I want them to err on the side of caution. I want them to err on the side of the protection of the child," she said to the Daily Mail. And I can't blame her for that, because she lost so much in such a short span of time. Her daughter, a caretaker for her own daughter when she knew it wasn't a safe environment for her to be there, and even a part of herself was within Bennett. The emotional, mental, and physical scars that Stephen Platel had left on Alyssa and everyone involved in this case will be ones that may never heal and may never go away. But Alyssa is a survivor of a real-life story that hopefully we will never have to hear one like this ever again. And also, just to remind you that if you need help with a domestic situation, I'll remind you that thehotline.org is available 24/7, day or night, via live chat on the website or by calling 1-800-799-7233 or 1-800-799-SAFE. Be it male or female, nobody should have to be subjected to these types of horrors, and there is always help out there for people who need it. So please pass this information along to somebody you might know as well. Thank you. But that's going to do it for this episode. If you appreciated the work, feel free to head over to Apple Podcasts and drop a 5-star review. It honestly helps me out more than you could ever understand. And even feel free to share the episode with a friend or someone that you might think may appreciate this one. I'm always up for meeting new listeners. I'll also remind you that I do have a merchandise store now, so if you'd like to get one of my cool new designs on a shirt, hoodie, or even a face mask, check the episode description and give it a click and snag some merch while you can. I've still got the Jeff the Raccoon design, the Old Pickle design, and even a fun little Ted Cruz Zodiac design as well. And I'll also be releasing new designs on the Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts, so follow me there at Murder and Such. And if you'd like to follow me personally, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, the PlayStation Network, Snapchat, and Steam at Huntor27. Of course, a massive shout out goes to my executive producer patrons at the $5 level, in which you can join at patreon.com/murderandsuch to get the show early, ad-free, and a permanent 30% off discount on merch. Plus, you can make sure that my booty gets a little more junk in the trunk, if you'd like to help out, that is. So thank you to my executive producers, Casey Jones, Chantel Wilson, Jason W., Michelle Davis, Strictly Homicide Podcast, Angel Renee, the Bama Brew Review Podcast, Aaron Albertson, Michelle Pierce, Jax, Martha Pierce, Alex Aguirre, Justin Reebsum, Nikki, McKenna Johnson, Ariel Safir, Tracy Ford, Stacy Jenks, Benjamin Welch, Ashley Collier, Charkley Daniels, Erica Summers, Ashley Black and Tech Support, Danielle Longamore, Heather Wright with Nature vs. Narcissism, Sarah Thompson, Dakota Curtis, and none other than Big Daddy Thick Dick. So thank you to all of my amazing supporters. Thank you to the shitty ads that are in the show. But most of all, thank you for spending some time with me. I do appreciate you. So thank you. But as always, my name is Hunter, reminding you to wash your filthy goddamn hands, wear a mask. I love you, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.